Okay, welcome to quad tutorial number 4. You know the deal. You're going to need a marker board, marker, wipe, and calculator with you. If you don't have it, pause it and come on back. All right, so we've been working on solving quadratic equations, and you're going to notice that in this tutorial we don't have an equation. We don't have an equal sign. We don't have anything on the other side. We just have x squared minus 8x. And so I wanted to talk about a technique we're going to be using, which is factoring, to solve some quadratics that can't be solved by the square root method that we focused on in the first pack. And so when we look at x squared minus 8x, what we're going to do is we're going to ask ourselves, hey, does x squared have anything in common with negative 8x? Another way to think about it is, if we were undistributing, could we take something out from both of them? So I'm looking at x squared and negative 8x. I'm like, oh, they both have an x in common. I'm going to take that x out. So what we're doing is we really are undistributing. And so think about what we do when we distribute. When we distribute, we are multiplying into the parentheses. When we're factoring, we are undistributing, which is dividing. So if we stop, now sometimes people don't need to do this. They can just go, oh yeah, x times x, that's going to give me my x squared. But some people have to stop and go, let's see. If I divide an x into x squared, oh, that's right, that gives me an x. And they write down their x. If they take their negative 8x and divide by an x, oh, that's right, those cancel out, it gives me a negative 8. But a lot of people, most people, don't have to do that division. It's more intuitive, because look at what we have. If we were to stop and distribute, we'd say x times x is x squared. X times negative 8 is negative 8x. So I want you to write in that box that factoring, well, we're going to say factoring the GCF. Okay, what's the GCF? The greatest common factor. X is the biggest factor that I could pull out from both x squared and negative 8x. So when we factor the GCF out, what we're really doing is undistributing. And if you think about it that way, that may help. So the first skill that we're going to learn before we can jump back into solving quadratic equations is this idea of factoring the greatest common factor out. So factoring what goes, the biggest thing we can think of that goes into both of our terms, or maybe even 3 or 4 terms, and it's undistributing. So let's go ahead and switch to marker boards and see if we can practice this. Go ahead and pause and then come on back. All right, so I'm looking at x squared and 2x, and I see the biggest thing that goes into both of those terms is an x. So I'm going to take out an x. I'm going to put in this spot whatever would give me an x squared when I distribute, and that's going to be x, right? If I distributed, x times x gives me the x squared. In this spot, I'm going to put whatever, if I distributed, x times what is going to give me 2x. A positive 2, right? If I distribute, x times x gives me x squared, x times 2 gives me 2x. So this is a way to rewrite what was given to us by factoring out the GCF, the greatest common factor. All right, we're going to do the same thing with something that looks a little bit different. Now, not only do I have the x's in both terms, but I have a number as well. So let's go ahead and look first at the number 12 and 10. Can you think of the greatest common factor? So really that's a fancy way of saying the biggest number that goes into both 12 and 10. So let's think about it. Factors of 12, let's see. Obviously 1, but we're not going to include 1. 2 goes into 12, and 3 goes into 12, and 4 goes into 12, and 6 goes into 12, and 12 goes into 12. That's a lot of numbers that go into 12. 10, only 2 goes in, 5, and 10. All right, did you notice what's the biggest number that goes into both? Just 2. That's all I can pull out there. And so then let's look at the x squared. And the x, what's the biggest amount of x's I can pull out that both of these terms have in common? Well, just a plain old x, right? If I pulled out an x squared, that's way too big for this x. This x doesn't have an x squared in it. So 2x is what I'm going to take out, and let's see what's left. If I divided 2x into 12x squared, I'd end up with a 6x, right? If you don't need to do that, you could just say, hey, what do I put here so that when I distribute, 2x times 6x gives me a 12x squared. Okay, same thing here. What can I pull out of the, if I looked at the 10x and I divide it by what I'm pulling out, 2x, I see that I get a 5. There's the minus, I'm going to pull that down. But once again, you could just say to yourself, what do I put here so that 2x times that gives me my negative 10x? So this is the same thing as what we started with. It's just that it's in what we call factored form, because we factored out our GCF. So it's now in factored form. Okay, I realized something. Okay, yeah, no, we're good, we're good. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch to marker boards and practice that same thing. Go ahead and pause, or sometimes with marker boards, if you don't want to pause and you want to just learn it again, stay with me as I teach it. So here we go. You've either paused and are back, or you never paused. So I'm looking at 7, I'm looking at 14. What's the biggest number that goes into both 7 and 14? That's right, 7. So that's the number that I'm going to pull out. I'm going to factor out 7. Now let's look at x squared and x. What's the biggest x I can pull out that both of the terms have in common? That's right, it's just the x. So what's left? Once again, sometimes it helps people to put these lines. What should I put in this first line so that when I distribute, 7x times whatever I write here is going to give me 7x squared? And you're right, it's an x. Once again, you could always take the term, you could divide it by what we just factored out. Choop, choop. We're just going to end up with an x. Same thing here, we could take that 14x and divide it by what we're factoring out, and we'd end up with 14 divided by 7, which is 2. Okay. If we wanted to check ourselves and go backwards, 7x times x gives me 7x squared. 7x times negative 2 gives me negative 14x. Once again, this is the same exact value as this. It's the same exact thing. It's just in a different form that we called factored form. And we're learning this new skill because it's going to help us to solve quadratic equations that we can't solve any other way. All right, let's see if we have another one. Okay, so whoa, here we've got 3 things, right? We've got 3 things. We've got the 4x squared, the negative 8x, and the 16. We're going to look at it and say to ourselves, what's in common with all 3? Do you notice that this last one doesn't have an x? That means I can't factor out an x, but I certainly can factor out a number. Give me 1 second. So I'm going to look, what's the biggest number that goes into 4, 8, and 16? Think about that for a second. 2 does go into all 3, but what's the biggest number? 4, and that's all I can pull out. So I pull out a 4 from 4x squared. What's left is an x squared. If I divide negative 8x by 4, I get negative 2x. If I divide 16 by 4, I get 4. And this is my factored form. They're the same thing, they're just in different forms. All right, let's try that on marker boards. Go ahead and give it a pause. Come on back. All right. I noticed that my 10 does not have an x, so I cannot pull an x out from these 3 terms because all the terms have to have that in common, and the 10 doesn't. So I have to pull out, just look at the numbers. I have a 2, I have a 4, and I have a 10. What's the biggest number that goes into all 3 of those? That's right, just a 2. And so when I factor out the 2, look what I'm left with. Once again, this is the factored form of what we started with. All right, I want you to go ahead and practice because we are done, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Good luck with your practice.